For our math warm-up today, I have a set of 5 decimals here. And what I need for you to do is round the decimal to the nearest tenth to start with. And then we'll discuss later on in this lesson how do we round or do an estimate to help with adding and subtracting decimals. So round each of these decimals to the nearest tenth. Pause your video and do that now, please. And let's take a look. If we are going to round 0 and 4/10 to the nearest tenth, we can't change it. It's already the nearest tenth, right? So we would still call that 0 and 4/10. We take a look at the second one. We have 0 and 75/100. We're going to round that to the nearest tenth. So we're going to look at the 7. We're going to look to the right of that 7. We have a 5, which means that this would round to 0 and 8/10. Let's look at the third one. We have 0 and 53/100. We're going to look at the digit to the right of that 5. It's a 3. So it is not a 5 or higher, so that will remain 0 and 5/10. Our next one, we have 0 and 219 thousandths. Our 2 is in the thousand or the tenths place. We have a 1 in the place to the right, so this would stay 0 and 2/10. And our last one, we have a 0 and we have a 9 to the right, which means that's going to bump that up to 0 and 1/10. How'd you do? Okay, so we're going to get to the meat of the lesson today, which is adding and subtracting decimals. So why are we adding and subtracting decimals? Well, first of all, decimals are part of real life. We see them in money. We see them in costs of things at the store. They give us unit prices for different items. We see them at the gas station. So they are all around us. We even see them in sports. So how are we going to add or subtract decimals, you might ask? Well, there are some options, of course. We can use a grid, which is what I have over here. We can use a T-chart, and we're definitely going to use some estimation practices as well. So let's talk about how I'm going to add or subtract numbers using a grid. Let's say that I have the problem 4 and 3/10 plus 3 and 9/10. Now, looking at that grid, I am not going to be able to represent that on a hundreds grid, am I? So if I had something like 0 and 7/10 plus 0 and 3/10, I could represent that on the grid. And how would I do that? I would color in 7/10, which would be all of these. And then I would add to that 3/10. Well, looky there. That equals a whole. So when we go to add that up, that's going to equal 1 and 0 tenths because it's a whole. So that's just one example. So let's say that we have the problem 0 and 83 hundredths minus 0 and 35 hundredths. So we could use our grid, and how would we do that? We would shade in 83 hundredths. So we're going to shade all the way over here, all of this. This is going to be 83 hundredths. Okay, and we're going to want to subtract 35 hundredths. So we could go and we could just cross out, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have to cross out 30, right? So this would be 10, 20, 30. All of that would be crossed out. Then we could go back and count. What do we have left? Well, I have 10, 20, 30, 40. I have 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, and 48. So my answer would be 0 and 48 hundredths. Okay, so this would be one way that we could do a subtraction problem. So now you've seen an addition problem with the grid and a subtraction problem with the grid. So next, let's take a look at how do we use a T-chart. So let's take the problem 4 and 83 hundredths plus 3 and 16 hundredths. So I like to use T-charts because they're really good for organizing your numbers, making sure that you line up your decimals, and that you have all of your digits in the correct columns. So one of the most important things about adding and subtracting decimals is making sure that you line up your decimal points. I cannot emphasize that enough. Line up your decimal points. That is going to help you get the correct answer, and using a T-chart is going to help you line them up. So let's see how we would go about that. I'm going to take the 4 and 83 hundredths. I'm going to place the 4 here. I'm going to place my decimal point right on the line. I'm going to write my 8 and my 3. Then I'm going to take the 3 and the 16 hundredths. I'm going to place it underneath. Put my decimal point, write my 1, write my 6. Then we're going to place the line underneath, just like we were adding regular numbers, except we're going to do it within a T-chart. Okay, so we're going to add, just like we would add regular numbers. We're going to pretend that the decimal point is not there now that we have everything lined up where it's supposed to be. In fact, all we have to do is bring that decimal point down. It is not going to move, okay? We're going to start in the ones column just like we add regular numbers. So we're going to do 3 plus 6, which gives us 9, and 8 plus 1, which gives us 9. Then we're going to move over to the whole numbers, and we have 4 plus 3, which gives us 7. So our answer to this problem would be 7 and 99 hundredths. So let's try a subtraction problem. We're going to do it the same way. We're going to place the numbers in our T-chart. So I have 7 and 3 hundredths. So I'm going to put 7 here, decimal point, 3 hundredths, and then I'm going to subtract 6 and 36 hundredths. So we're going to put 6, put our decimal point, 36, put our subtraction sign. We're going to draw our line. And now we're going to bring that decimal point down. It's not going to move. and we're going to do our subtraction. So you'll notice that our ones column, we have 3 minus 6. We can't do that. We're going to have to regroup. We go to the tens, there's a 0. So we're going to go all the way over to the 7, make that a 6, and we're going to come over here. This becomes a 10, and then we're going to cross that out. It becomes a 9. As you can see, we're not changing the way that we subtract. We still subtract the same way with regrouping, just like we would if there weren't any decimal points. We're going to do 13 minus 6, which is going to give us 7. 9 minus 3 is 6. And we don't have anything over here after we subtract 6 minus 6. So our answer to this subtraction problem is going to be 0 and 67 hundredths. So we've used a grid and we've used a T-chart. Next, we're going to take a look at how do we do problems where we have to estimate and then actually solve. Okay, so let's take a look here. We're going to look at estimating and then actually solving, because you're going to have to do this when you do some of your work in class. So we have the problem 4 3/10 plus 3 2/10. So if I'm going to do an estimate, I am going to round this decimal to the closest whole number. So the closest whole number for 4 3/10 is going to be 4. And the closest whole number for 3 2/10 is going to be 3. So my estimate is going to be 7. Now I'm going to make a T-chart off to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and plug in those numbers and work that out. We're adding them. Bring down that decimal point, and notice what my actual answer is. 7 5/10. This was our estimate. This is our actual answer. As you can see, we did a good job. All right, so let's try a subtraction problem for good measure here. We're going to take a look at 4 73 hundredths minus 2 69 hundredths. First of all, I need to estimate. So 4 73 hundredths, closest whole number is going to be 5 minus, and if we look at 2 69 hundredths, that's going to be closest whole number of 3. So 5 minus 3, my estimate is 2. So now I'm going to take that actual problem, I'm going to plug it in to my T-chart and make sure that I line up my digits, and I'm going to subtract. So again, we cannot do 3 minus 9, so we're going to regroup. That's going to give us 4, 0. We're going to put our decimal point, and 2. So our actual answer is 2 4 hundredths. Our estimate was 2. Nice job. So we did the solving already. We used our T-chart. We checked our work with our estimates, and we looked at the final answer to determine whether we were in the ballpark or not. So just understand that you need to make sure that you do your estimates, and then you're actually going to solve the problem and double check that your answer is reasonable. So let's summarize this lesson. What have we done? We have learned how to add decimals and subtract decimals using two different methods. We used the hundreds grid. We used T-chart. And we made sure to do some estimation. So now you're going to become quite the mathematician, being able to add and subtract decimals. Until next time.